Okay, this is the second area of B2, homeostasis and response. You've already done the ecology one, and just to go over again, the whole purpose is you're trying to make your learning memorable. So when you're making notes on it, this was an ecology one, when you're making notes on it, you're looking at doing things like this. Let me just find a pen. There's the carbon cycle. And by doing these doodles, by doing these notes, the keywords standing out, there's biodiversity, there's a note saying what it means, here's the deforestation, etc., the loss of bees in the UK. This adds detail to it, and all these drawings, all these notes, makes it memorable, makes it really easy to go back and revise again and again and again. There's the water cycle at the top, but actually what you're trying to do is make it as memorable as possible. So, in terms of homeostasis and response, got to find my pen bit. First of all, we're talking about fast responses, and fast responses are the job of the nervous system. Now remember, any words in red are the keywords that are going to go on your mind map, and then you'd add a little explanation. So in our nervous system, we use it for fast responses. We use it for our reactions, we use it to move, we use it to coordinate quick things. And our nervous system is mainly made out of two areas, the central nervous system. And the first one of those is here in your head, and that is your brain, just there. And then the second one, equally as important, is your spinal cord, going all the way down the inside of your backbone. So the brain and the spinal cord make up our central nervous system. So here we have the brain, here we have the spinal cord, and here we have central nervous system. Apologies for my writing. Now, within the nervous system, we have other nerves. You have the ones that go from your skin and carry messages into your nervous system. So, for example, here from your hand, there'll be nerves going into the central nervous system. And then there'll be nerves that come back out of the central nervous system and go to things like muscles in your arm. And then right here in the middle, inside the spinal cord and inside the brain, there are other types of nerve to pass that message on and make a decision. So the very fastest reactions we have involve only three nerves. Now the word nerve is quite often changed to the word neuron. Nerves and neurons are exactly the same thing. And the first type we have are called sensory nerves. They carry information in. They carry information into our nervous system from our senses. So sensory nerves go from your eyes, your ears, your skin, all around your body into the central nervous system. The nerves that are in the middle, the ones that make the decisions, are called relay nerves. And then the nerves that carry the information back out to make you do things like blink or move away from something sharp or shout ouch, those are your motor nerves. And you may well have heard of a medical condition called motor neuron disease. And motor neuron disease is where people have a disease of these nerves, so they can't react to things. Their movements are jerky. They can't actually move their muscles very well, and it gets worse and worse. This is a typical nerve cell. So here, this part of it, and this is one of the types of cells that you should know from Biology 1, that part of it is called the cell body. And this part of it, the long bit in between, is called an axon. The axon can be up to 1 meter long. So nerves are extremely long cells to carry messages quickly. And all that happens inside a nerve cell, change colour, is here it might be joined to another nerve and another nerve and another nerve and another nerve. When a message comes in, it could start a message here, which quickly goes down here, a little electric signal. It goes down here and it may well move this muscle here. So because of this message coming in here, this muscle here moves. And it's as simple as that. The nerve cells themselves, made up of the cell body, which is wider, and it contains the nucleus, and then the long axon carrying the message. Now, when nerves join together, this nerve here might well join to another nerve cell. So maybe that's linked on here. Just draw a quick one. And this nerve cell carries on. There's the axon. Here's the cell body with the nucleus. There's a gap. It's a tiny, only a couple of nanometers across, a tiny little gap between nerve cells. So the signal doesn't carry straight on, the signal changes. This gap here is called a synapse. So all a synapse is, it's where two nerve cells join. Now the only other label we need for this diagram, all these spiky bits like here, the spiky bits where other nerve cells can join on are called dendrites. And then over this side of the page, if I change colour again, if I can find my pens, go for a blue. That's not going to be very good on that background. Blue. Over this side, this is what actually happens at a nerve. So the signal comes along, purple line, the electrical signal, and when it gets to here, it releases a chemical. The chemical travels across to the next nerve and starts a signal again. And as I said before, these synapses, this thing I've just drawn a purple circle around, this gap in the middle here is tiny. The only other thing to add to that is this chemical that travels between, there's a group of them in our bodies, so I'll find room to write it. It's called, I have to go all the way over here, the chemical at a synapse is called a neurotransmitter. So if you're looking at your mind map now, you've probably drawn a diagram of a neuron with the three labels, the cell body, the nucleus and the axon. I would have added the axon carries the signal a long distance at times, and dendrites are where other nerves can join on. On my mind map, I'd have a little diagram of a synapse, and you don't need to draw something like I've drawn. Synapse can look as simple as and then I've got my signal coming down, I've got my chemical being released, and then I've got my signal carrying on. So actually a little scribble diagram with a couple of labels help making it memorable, and that synapse is the gap where two nerves join. And the chemical that moves across is a neurotransmitter. Sometimes we try and block neurotransmitters. For example, painkillers might block a neurotransmitter, so we can't pass on a pain signal. And therefore, paracetamol, anodine, ibuprofen, they block neurotransmitters and make us feel better because we're not feeling the pain. It's still there, we just block the signal. Okay, so on this slide, what we're now looking at is a reflex. And once I find my pen point, there it is. First of all, what is a reflex? Well, the important things are, you know that a reflex is an automatic action. It is not conscious. You don't decide on your reflexes. It's really fast. And what's the purpose of a reflex? A reflex is there to protect. So when you blink, you're protecting your eyes. When you move away from a sharp stone in your shoe, you're protecting your skin. When we move away from a hot thing, like in this example, exactly the same. So, how does it work? Well, first of all, and you need to be able to break any action they give you, or give an example from your own knowledge. You need to be able to give an example of a reflex and broken down into 5 stages. And number one, on my example, is the stimulus is the change in the world around you. So the stimulus is a change. And in this case, the stimulus is the candle. What is the receptor, number 2? How do we know the candle's there? Well, in this case, it's not about seeing it. In this case, we've got heat receptors in our skin. So in this case, the receptor is the skin. And then what happens is that message travels, need a different colour highlighter really, that message travels here along that nerve you can see, all the way up your arm and into your spine. And then you can see it jumps at a synapse and it jumps into the relay nerve. Then it jumps and it's into the motor nerve, all the way back down this blue one until it ends up in that muscle there. So we've jumped a couple of stages there. Your receptor, the muscle, has sent a message to the coordinator, number 3. And in this case, it's the spine. It will always be the brain or the spine. That makes a decision. It sends the decision to the effector, stage 4. The effector is the physical part of your body that can actually do something. And in this case, it's a muscle. There's the muscle. Just circled it in blue there. Draw an arrow in case you can't see that. Here we go. The muscle is going to be moving the hand. So therefore, the response that you do is you move the hand. Now, what I'd suggest you do now on your mind map is, once you've done an example of a reflex, I think you're best off doing your own one. So if the stimulus was, if I went through a different example really quickly, if the stimulus was F and C, fish and chip smell. Right, fish and chip smell, my receptor would be my nose. So that's easy enough. My coordinator, my brain's closer to my nose, so that would be my brain. What would the effector be? The effector would be my saliva glands, and my response would be my mouth starts producing saliva. It smells a nice food that I like, and my automatic response that I haven't thought about is I start producing saliva, thinking that just because I'm cycling past the fish and chip shop, I'm now going to get some fish and chips. And then with reflexes, there's a required practical. And the required practical is to work out your reaction time. And I've got to point out at this stage, one of the most common mistakes made is people say that on the ruler you can measure your reaction time. No, you can't. On a ruler, you can measure a distance. Come back to that in a minute. So in the required practical, what you're expected to be able to do is, and you should have done this in class, you would get somebody to hold their fingers a few centimetres apart. Their hand is on a steady surface to stop them moving it up and down. And then randomly, the person that you're experimenting on, randomly, you, in your hand here, you let go of the ruler. What they've got to do is they see it with their eyes and then they quickly grab the ruler. So in this case, that's where the ruler was starting next to its thumb, and this is where it's ended. And what I've done is, that is how much distance the ruler travelled here, the distance it travelled, and that's what I record. I record the distance the ruler went down. Now, reactions, and it very much depends on your concentration, etc., etc. You do this type of experiment, for example, 10 times. Do it 10 times and then you work out an average. So you work out an average, so you've got a much more accurate measure. Now you could do an experiment. For example, they might ask you, how could you do an experiment to work out if caffeine affects your reaction time? And what you could do there is, you could have somebody with 0 caffeine and you could have somebody with 1 coffee. So a coffee they've drank and they've had 1 spoon of coffee in it. You could have somebody who's drank a coffee and it's got 2 spoons of coffee in it. And then what we could do is we could do the same experiment on them 10 times each, and we could see whether is their distance affected. Now the reason I keep saying distance, we use tables. There is a table You get anywhere online, you've probably given it during your science lessons, and on the table what it does is it says things like if you drop it 5 centimeters, that was, for example, I don't know, 0.1 milliseconds, and if you dropped it 10 centimeters, etc. So these reaction times we get from a table. And the other thing with this is sometimes they may ask questions about this practical in a way that nowadays most people, you type into Google reaction timer, you can use a computer program to measure reaction time, and that's how it's done more accurately. And you might get asked which is the best method. Now the good thing about the computer method is it gives you the measurements straight away. You don't have to look them up in a table. It's always going to be very random, so it doesn't depend upon the person you're working with. You only have to hit the space key, so it's easy to do rather than catch a ruler and concentrate on that because you might miss it. So actually, there's sometimes the argument for the computer method is more accurate than the old-fashioned ruler drop test, which is what this is called. So somewhere on your mind map, you'll have that little required practical next to where you've got that information about the nervous system. Okay. The other system we have in our bodies, probably not the best idea to be drawn in purple on this background. The other system is the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is made up of a series of glands. And the glands are not nervous at all. Glands are organs in your body that produce specific chemicals. So the signal is a chemical signal this time. The nervous system was an electrical signal. So we've got a chemical signal, and what do we call those chemicals? Well, the name for those chemicals that travel around our body are called hormones. All a hormone is a chemical made in the gland traveling around your body. And you're expected to know, in a male and female body, hence these two drawings, great haircuts they've got, you're expected to know the main glands in the body. And here, for example, inside at the base of the brain, very close to the brain, you've got something called the pituitary. I always have to spell that one and say it phonetically. It is the pituitary gland. We'll come back to that one in a few minutes because it's probably the most important one there. In your throat, on both of these people, you have the thyroid gland. That produces hormones that controls your metabolic rate, how fast your body works. Down here, what would normally be here is there's a kidney there and there's a kidney there near your back. On top of your kidneys, both sides, you've got two of them, you have something called adrenal glands. And adrenal glands produce adrenaline. That's what we get a burst of adrenaline sometimes when we exercise, when we want some power, when we're frightened, and sometimes they talk about people doing superhuman feats because of the adrenaline rush. Then we've got a gland down here, and it's only on women. That's the ovaries, and the ovaries produce the main hormones for sexual maturity and developing sexually as a woman. And exactly the same way that down here we have, sorry, at the moment, just so you can see, I've got a cat, there's its tail, climbing up my back. And my dogs won't do that, but my cat will. Obviously not getting enough attention. Testes. The testes produce testosterone, the main male hormone. So you need to know the positions of the main glands. And then right at the start there, I said what a hormone was. Now, quite a common thing to ask somebody is, what is a hormone? But with a 3-mark or a 4-mark answer. A hormone, by definition, as I said before, it's something that is produced in a, one second, find my pointer. A hormone is a chemical. That's how I'd start it. It's a chemical. Now the cat has just walked across the computer and I have to try and, sorry, one second, that wasn't helpful. a chemical made in a gland released into your blood until it reaches a target organ. So you might be thinking, what? And I would be as well. So for example, in boys, the chemical testosterone is made in the testes, the gland, and it is released into your blood, and one of its effects would be your voice box, and in the voice box the voice would break and boys' voices deepen. And at the same time there's other targets such as their muscles growing and the body becoming hairier, etc. And yes, that was a dog, that wasn't a cat making a dog noise. So earlier I said we'd come back to this, and the reason for that is the pituitary gland is known as the master gland. And you don't need the detail on this diagram, but basically all of these chemicals are produced, keep going round and round. The pituitary gland makes loads of different hormones, and for example here it's causing breast development and the production of milk. Here it's telling the ovaries when to release the female hormones, that starts the menstrual cycle and everything. Here it's telling the thyroid gland to release the hormones that turn the thyroid gland on, so it makes the hormones for the metabolic rate. It's controlling growth. Basically, the pituitary is like the brain. It is in charge of the endocrine system and controls the other glands. Now, right at the start of this topic, the topic title was homeostasis. And these are the words in the centre of your page: homeostasis and response. So, what is homeostasis? And it's very easy. Homeostasis is maintaining optimum conditions for our body to work. So maintaining the optimum conditions for our body to work means controlling things. So for example, your body is always at 37 degrees Celsius. And what your body does is, you will have certain things you do if you get too hot to get you back to 37. And if you get too cold, you'll have certain things your body does to get you back up to 37. So there's certain things. So for example, temperature is the first thing. We also control our water level. We control the concentration of our blood, so the water level. So we can decide on how much wee to do or how much wee not to do to keep that water level. And when you feel thirsty, it's often because you need more water into your body to maintain that level. And the third thing is sugar level. We have to have a constant sugar level. And we all know that diabetes is when you can't control your sugar level. So anybody without diabetes can control their sugar level. Now, we'll talk more about our diabetes in a minute. But basically, in terms of sugar level, that's the one everybody needs to know in detail. Although if you're doing separate science, you need to know a bit more about water level and temperature. These little particles I've drawn are just glucose particles. And what we're able to do in our body is we can turn glucose, and over here, lots of glucoses have been joined together. So it's not soluble anymore, it's stored away. So it's stored away in massive, great big molecules, much bigger than this. And glucose is stored in our bodies as glycogen. Now, where is it stored? Well, it's stored in the liver, and it's stored in lots of our big muscles. And if you do lots of exercise, then in your liver and muscles, you will have a big glycogen store. If you don't do much exercise, you won't have much glycogen stored, so you'll get tired very easily when you start to exercise. But our body will store more and more glycogen depending upon how active you are. Some people have enough glycogen in their body to run a marathon. Other people have enough glycogen in their body to run 2 miles before they're big or exhausted. How do we control this? Well, that's the job of hormones. So the first hormone, and I'm deliberately writing in red because you need all of this, the hormone that locks away the glucose, that hormone is called insulin. So in this table below, insulin is produced in the pancreas, and that's the role of the pancreas here. It makes the hormones. The pancreas produces insulin, and the target is the liver. And what insulin will tell the liver to do is it will tell it to lock away this glucose because my level is too high. Maybe I just ate. And then imagine this bottom arrow. When do I need this hormone, the one that unlocks the glucose? Well, I need it when I'm running out of sugar. So if my sugar level is too low, I produce a second hormone, and it is glucagon. Where's it made? Well, handily enough, it's made in the pancreas, and the target is the liver. And all it's doing is saying to the liver, right, let some of that glucose out now, my sugar level's gone down, I haven't eaten for hours. So at this very moment in your bodies, as you do this, if you've eaten recently some sugary foods or carbohydrates, you're probably here. You're probably producing insulin and locking sugar away. If you haven't eaten for a long time, you're probably here, and your body's releasing glucagon and releasing sugar that you stored away earlier. But you'll either be one of those two. And so if your blood sugar level increases, you lock the sugar away and you store the glucose, and therefore your sugar level goes down. If, however, your sugar level goes down, you do the opposite and you take this glycogen, you unlock it with glucagon back into glucose, and your sugar level goes back up. So we can keep our sugar level steady. And I'm just going to put it on here again. It's this bit. The pancreas is the gland. The pancreas produces the hormones, but it's not where we store sugar. It's not the target. And then the last bit about sugar level is what happens when it goes wrong. And here you are in a normal healthy body. You produce insulin. The insulin goes into these cells and gets it to lock away glucose. So here's a type 1 diabetic. A type 1 diabetic, and these are people normally who either are born diabetics or develop it very early on. And what they've got is they've got a problem with their pancreas. They don't produce insulin, or they don't produce enough insulin. So when people talk about diabetes, this one is the main medical issue. What they'd have to do, and they monitor their own sugar level, and they can inject insulin that we produce. So we can have artificially produced insulin that they inject when they need to replace it. The other type of diabetes is one that people develop through their life, type 2 diabetes. Now, it could be, and the sort of links here are quite often type 2 diabetes is common in people who are overweight. It's common in people who are obese. It's common in people who eat far too much carbohydrate and people who eat far too much sugary foods. Not that they are going to get type 2 diabetes, but they're much more at risk of developing it, especially as they get older. And what happens here is you do make insulin, but your cells fail to respond properly to it. The good news is type 2 diabetes, the earlier you catch it, it is reversible. So quite often you get people who are a bit older, maybe not ate the most sensible food, maybe a bit overweight, and the doctor might say to them, you're at risk of becoming type 2 diabetic. Your body has started to do this. Your body has started to not respond to insulin. And then they're put on a really careful diet, lowering the carbohydrates, lowering their weight, and actually you can go straight back and lose that, and your body can respond to insulin as well. So type 2 diabetes is caused mainly by lifestyle, and therefore it's reversible. Type 1 diabetes is a medical condition that you develop, and therefore it's treated by injecting an artificial produced insulin. So make sure you've got the clear differences between type 1 and type 2 diabetes on your mind map so that you can easily bring those back. How are you going to record that so it's memorable? Well, type 1 is real diabetics that don't produce insulin. Type 2, it's the failing to respond to insulin. So moving on with the hormones, we've got, and this won't take long because you've done this in personal development, aspiring futures lessons over time. Testosterone for boys and estrogen for girls. They are the main masculine and feminine hormones produced in the testicles here, produced in the ovaries here. The effects on the body are bringing about something called secondary sexual characteristics. So in boys, it's as easy as facial hair, voice breaks, growing hair under the arms, growing pubic hair, and the testicles developing and being able to produce sperm. And in the girl, it's wrong place, underarm hair, the breasts grow and are ready to produce milk, the hips grow, ready for childbirth, pubic hair, and the period starts, so that there's an egg being released every month and they're at the stage where they could become pregnant. Just going to circle very quickly the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is what activates the testes or the ovaries, that master gland. And so then the last thing we're really considering with the menstrual cycle is that control by hormones. Now, this looks like a really complicated graph, but this graph is in textbooks, it's on bite size, you'll see it everywhere. There are, down the bottom of this screen, 4 hormones. And estrogen's got the American spelling on here, they forget some of the letters, bless them. There's 4 hormones here controlling the menstrual cycle every month. And all this graph is showing is, in those different colours, what levels at different stages. So I'll go through this quickly and then I've got a better diagram for you. So don't worry so much, see if you can understand it. Each month, that green hormone, and if I draw in green it might be easier for you. This green hormone here, follicle stimulating hormone, each month at this high level here, where it is here, it's actually produced by the pituitary, so I'm going to write pituitary, and its target is the ovaries. And what it's telling the ovaries to do is to start producing an egg. Once it's producing an egg, here, I better change to red, the estrogen levels go up. So that the green level then drops away down here. So it doesn't produce any more eggs. It's been inhibited. Inhibit means stopped. Stopped. So now the pituitary is not telling it to grow an egg because it already is. Then all of a sudden there's this brown hormone, luteinizing hormone. This great big brown spike up here, where I've just drawn an arrow pointing at it. That one says LH, tells the ovary to release the egg. And at this stage, you could become pregnant. You've just released the egg. So for the next few days, that are the few days in the month are when most pregnancies are likely to happen. And that's then this job here, progesterone, the 4th hormone, the yellow one, this one that's going up here, progesterone keeps the lining of the womb. So it keeps the lining of the uterus in case you become pregnant, because that's where the egg will start to grow from if it's been fertilized. So that's quite complex, I understand that. So actually, this is my sort of way that I sort of remember it. Up here we've got the pituitary in the brain, or at the base of the brain, and down here we've got the ovaries. And this is obviously a lovely picture of a beautiful woman. This hormone, FSH, is saying to the ovary, grow egg. And this hormone, I'm just going to put O on it, or estrogen. Estrogen says, I am growing an egg. It turns off the pituitary so you don't grow too many eggs. Then it comes to the next stage. The next stage is the pituitary produces LH. LH says release egg. And then the ovary produces progesterone, which stops you having your period for a few days in case you do become pregnant. If you don't become pregnant, progesterone goes down and then you lose the lining. You actually have a period. Now what I suggest you do with this beautiful diagram is, that's not a bad one to be able to draw yourself. And then FSH, what's its job? Its job is, tells the ovaries to produce an egg. Estrogen tells the pituitary to stop making FSH. LH, luteinizing hormone, tells it to release an egg, and progesterone keeps the lining of the womb so that you don't enter your period straight away. And then the only other bits to add on are, what could you do to help a woman who's really struggling, or a couple who are really struggling to have children? Well, what you could do is you could give them lots of FSH so they produce loads of eggs. If they're producing loads of eggs, there's more chance of them becoming pregnant. So we can use FSH as something called a fertility treatment. It's one of the first fertility treatments that you can get if you're struggling to have a baby. And then the other side of things are, if we know the hormones that work, you can actually use hormones. So for example, we could give somebody progesterone and estrogen in a pill, and they could take the pill every day and their body thinks they're pregnant. So what you are expected to know is, you're expected to know how most contraceptives work. So the pill, made out of hormones, and I'll just put an O and a P, you get an estrogen or a progesterone pill, or actually now a lot of pills are both of them together. Or you could have those chemicals in a patch that you change every week on your skin. Or you could have an implant under your skin. You could have an injection of the hormones every 1 to 3 months. So we could actually have, and this one up the top here, a hormonal intrauterine system, a longer lasting system releasing those hormones to stop your body producing eggs. And therefore, if you don't produce eggs, you won't become pregnant. The only thing I will say, down this side, look at it. Some methods of contraception, 99% effective, some down as low as 72% effective. So just because you use contraception doesn't mean you won't get pregnant. And so the next steps for you now, you've got this amazing mind map in front of you. You're probably going to get it marked by your teacher. Use YouTube, use GCSE Bite Size, use my GCSE Science if that's something you use, and use your exercise book from when you first were taught this subject. Add to your mind map. Not today, you've done your work. Next time you look at it, go to one of them and add more detail on, so that you're not missing anything. If you've got a revision guide, use that, add stuff on. Okay, thank you for listening. I will stop when I find the stop key.